Imagine walking through a quiet village at dusk. The wind is still, the trees don't move, but somewhere in the distance you hear it, slow footsteps dragging across dirt and a low moan that doesn't sound quite human. Zombies. We think we know them. Groaning bodies, outstretched hands, rotting skin, a horror cliché maybe. But what if the truth is older, darker, and far more real than Hollywood ever dared to show? The idea of the dead rising didn't begin with movies or video games. It began in whispers, in forgotten rituals, in old beliefs born from fear and control. Long before they filled our screens, zombies haunted our ancestors' imagination. They weren't brain-hungry monsters. They were symbols of something even scarier, being alive without freedom, breathing without will, moving but empty. In today's episode of the Myth Archive, we peel back the flesh of the modern zombie and uncover its ancient bones. From the hills of Haiti to the fevered fears of colonial empires, from black magic to viral outbreaks, we explore how the zombie transformed from cursed soul to cultural obsession. But why does this myth survive, evolve, even thrive? Because deep down, we fear more than just death. We fear losing ourselves, losing control, losing the spark that makes us us. So tonight, we walk alongside the undead to ask not just what they are, but why they won't stay buried, and maybe why a part of us doesn't want them to. Stay with us. What lies ahead may raise more than just the dead. Before they were flesh-hungry monsters staggering through apocalyptic streets, zombies were something else entirely. They were the walking symbols of a stolen soul. To trace the true origins of the undead, we must leave behind Hollywood's makeup studios and step into the humid, haunted hills of Haiti, where life, death, and spirit are never truly separate. In Vodou, a living religion born from the ashes of slavery and the blending of African, Caribbean, and Catholic beliefs, death is not the end, it's a crossing. But sometimes that crossing is interrupted. In this world, a zombie is not a cannibal, it's a victim. A person resurrected not by fate or miracle, but by ritual domination. Their mind hollowed, their will erased, their body animated to serve, not to live. In Haitian belief, the soul has two parts, the gros bon ange, the life force, and the ti bon ange, the essence of personality. To make a zombie is to sever the ti bon ange, leaving behind a breathing shell. A man who once loved, remembered, dreamed, reduced to a silent laborer with no past, no future. The sorcerer who performs this act is the Bokor, a Vodou priest working with darker forces. His tools are secret powders, incantations, poisons. Some believe these rituals use tetrodotoxin, a paralytic from the pufferfish, capable of simulating death. In Haiti's oral tradition, and in reports by missionaries and colonizers alike, there are whispers of people buried, mourned, then found walking the fields days later, blank-eyed, voiceless, enslaved again after death. And isn't that the true horror? Not a monster chasing us in the night, but the idea that even death cannot free us from chains. The zombie, in its original form, is not entertainment. It's resistance encoded in myth. It reflects the legacy of human beings who were once bought, sold, broken, and who carried their pain into the spiritual world. For them, to become a zombie was not a fate worse than death. It was death that refused to let go. This is why the earliest stories of the undead aren't just scary. They're sacred. They are echoes of a people who lost everything except memory. So when we see a zombie shuffle across the screen, we should ask ourselves, are we watching a horror story or a history lesson we've forgotten? Because in Haiti, the zombie doesn't just haunt the grave, it haunts the past. The Western world did not discover the zombie. It misunderstood it. When American soldiers occupied Haiti in the early 20th century, they brought back more than stories. They brought back specters. Sensational accounts of dark rituals, walking corpses, and strange powders began to fill pulp magazines and missionary journals. But what they saw wasn't Vodou, it was fear, refracted through a colonial lens. In 1932, Hollywood released White Zombie, often cited as the first zombie film. It told the tale of a young white woman turned into a mindless slave by a Haitian sorcerer. But this wasn't just horror, it was propaganda. Behind the tropes of necromancy and exotic lands was something more insidious, a white anxiety about race, control, and the unknown other. The zombie, stripped of its original meaning, became a fantasy of domination in reverse. As the decades passed, the undead began to change. No longer servants of magic, they became victims of science, radiation, viruses, biological warfare. Slowly, the zombie lost its spiritual roots and was reborn as the zombie, a faceless horde, consuming everything in its path. But the fear remained. It just wore a new mask. What we see in Western zombie films is not merely the fear of death, but the fear of losing the self, of becoming part of the crowd, of being controlled, erased, absorbed. In a world driven by machines, media, and mass identity, the zombie reflects the modern apocalypse. Not fire from the skies, but emptiness within. The Walking Dead are no longer bound to sugarcane fields. Now they haunt office cubicles, shopping malls, endless suburbia. And still, the original question lingers beneath the surface. What makes us human when memory and freedom are gone? The transformation of the zombie into the zombie didn't just distort a myth. It revealed something deep about the West itself. A world haunted not by spirits, but by the loss of control. The terror that one day we won't be who we are, that we'll keep moving, but without purpose, without soul. So the Western zombie is not just a monster, it's a mirror, held up to a civilization afraid of its own reflection. By the time Night of the Living Dead reached American theaters in 1968, the zombie had changed forever. No longer a product of dark sorcery or ancient ritual, it now rose from within us. George A. Romero's film didn't just create the modern zombie genre, it rewired it. His undead were no longer the victims of bocors or chemical experiments. They were vague, relentless, and everywhere. And that vagueness was terrifying, because now the monster didn't come from a distant island. It came from our own collapse. The late 60s were already a time of rupture. Vietnam, civil rights unrest, assassinations. Into that chaos stumbled Romero's zombies, blank-eyed, slow-moving, devouring anything in their path. They weren't evil. They weren't even angry. They were just us, stripped of meaning, and the public understood. Maybe not consciously, but deeply. In Romero's universe, the dead didn't just walk. They consumed. They gathered in shopping malls drawn by some kind of memory. They tore apart the nuclear family. They turned the living into the dead, not with curses, but with contact. And with each sequel, each cultural echo, the zombie adapted. During the Cold War, they became metaphors for nuclear annihilation. During the 2000s, they embodied fears of pandemics, terrorist cells, bioweapons. And in the age of endless consumerism, they became the ultimate symbol of mindless consumption, a crowd with no thoughts, just hunger. But beneath the blood and gore, there's always been a deeper terror. What if we've already become them? What if modern life, so saturated with screens, brands, surveillance, distraction, has already hollowed us out? What if we wake, work, scroll, and sleep, but no longer truly live? The zombie survives because it evolves, but what it truly feeds on is not flesh. It feeds on insecurity. It gnaws at the edges of our comfort zones, reminding us how fragile identity, memory, and freedom really are. We point at the screen and say, how horrifying. But the real horror is when we turn it off and still feel empty. The Horde is not at the gates. The Horde is already here, and maybe, just maybe, we're already part of it. The undead are not a Western invention. Across the world, across time, humanity has dreamed of what it means to rise after death. Not as spirit, but as body. Restless, hungry, broken, still here. In China, They hop. The jiangshi, often called the hopping vampire, is a stiff, pale corpse dressed in Qing dynasty robes, arms stretched forward, body bouncing awkwardly as it drains the qi or life energy of the living. But behind the folkloric absurdity lies an ancient fear that when rituals are broken, when burial is mishandled, the dead do not rest. The jiangshi isn't evil by choice. It is pulled back into the world by neglect, by forgotten duty. In Japan, the undead are quieter, sadder. Gaki, or hungry ghosts, are souls damned by their greed in life. They wander unseen, bloated with longing, mouths too small to feed, stomachs too vast to satisfy. In Buddhist cosmology, they are not monsters. They are a moral reflection, a mirror to those who hoard, crave, consume without compassion. They are not feared. They are pitied. In medieval Europe, the revenant crawls from the grave not to feed, but to accuse. The dead rise when they have been wronged, when their bodies rot without proper burial, when injustice goes unpunished. These walking corpses, sometimes called Draugr in Norse tales, sometimes Nachtseher in German ones, return not just as horror, but as memory with a purpose, to haunt the living into remembrance. Even in South America, stories echo of El Muerto, the deathless one, who roams deserts and villages, driven by curses that bind him to unfinished vengeance. In India, the Vetala clings to corpses, speaking riddles, mocking the living from within the dead. In Africa, the concept of spiritual bondage after death appears in countless tribal cosmologies where the soul can be trapped, twisted, or used by the living for personal gain. Every culture has its version of the undead, but the patterns are hauntingly similar. They rise when we forget, when we bury injustice, when we feed but do not feel, when ritual becomes routine and compassion decays. They rise not just from graves, but from guilt, grief, and greed. The zombie is global because our fear is global, the fear that death may not be the end, and that our actions in life may echo far beyond the grave. We call them jiangshi, gaki, draugr, vetala, but they all ask the same questions. What have we left undone? And what comes back when we turn our backs on the dead? What if the line between life and death is thinner than we think? What if zombies don't come from myth, but from misunderstanding? Throughout history, the dead have not always stayed dead. There are stories, documented ones, of people buried alive, only to awaken days later. Cases of catalepsy, epilepsy, or locked-in syndrome were once seen as curses, possession, or resurrection. In the 19th century, families feared premature burial so deeply that coffins were fitted with bells, breathing tubes, even escape hatches. Cemeteries built waiting mortuaries, where the bodies would rest for days, watched by attendants, just in case the corpse moved. But in Haiti, the fear wasn't of being buried alive, it was of being dug up. Some believe the zombie legends emerged from rare but real medical phenomena, states of extreme paralysis or trauma misread as death. Others point to tetrodotoxin, the neurotoxin found in pufferfish, as a scientific explanation. In controlled doses, it can mimic death, slowed heart rate, shallow breathing, total immobility. Combine that with cultural belief, trauma, and suggestion, and the illusion becomes a terrifying reality. In 1980, a man named Clervius Narcisse was declared dead in Haiti and buried. 18 years later, he returned, claiming to have been conscious during his burial, then enslaved on a plantation. Medical experts were baffled. Some called it a hoax. Others saw the chilling possibility of zombification through chemistry and psychological control. But perhaps science alone isn't the full answer. The zombie endures not just because of what chemicals can do to a body, but because of what fear can do to a society. The idea of losing autonomy, of having our minds erased, our bodies controlled, that fear transcends biology. Zombies speak to the fragile illusion of control. That no matter how advanced our medicine becomes, how many machines we build to measure life signs, there's always that shadow, that sliver of unknown. And it terrifies us Because if science can't fully explain what happens when the heart stops, but the eyes remain open, then maybe the undead aren't just possible. Maybe they're already here, waiting in hospital beds, buried under error, folklore, or denial. So where does superstition end and science begin? Maybe they don't sit on opposite ends of a line. Maybe they spiral around each other, like two hands digging into the same grave. We think of zombies as monsters, grotesque, soulless, other. But what if the true horror isn't them? It's us. Across every culture, every continent, the undead rise not from graveyards, but from places we try to forget. Slavery, hunger, injustice, neglect. They are the shadows of broken systems, buried traumas, and questions left unanswered. We invented zombies to personify fear, but somewhere along the way they became something more. They became mirrors. Mirrors that reflect a world sleepwalking through routine. Mirrors that show us what we become when we trade freedom for comfort, memory for entertainment, purpose for obedience. In Haiti, the zombie was a soul stolen by power. In the West, the zombie became a mind devoured by modernity. In ancient Asia and medieval Europe, the undead rose as warnings, not of death, but of lives lived without meaning. We fear them because they blur the lines we depend on between life and death, self and other, body and spirit. They remind us that it's possible to move, to speak, to exist without truly being alive. And that fear, that deep, quiet fear, is not about being eaten. It's about being empty. So when we tell zombie stories, we're not just imagining the end of the world. We're mourning the erosion of something deeper. Connection, identity, soul. Not all who die are buried, and not all who walk are alive. So the next time you see a pair of vacant eyes in the crowd, or feel yourself slipping into numb routine, ask yourself, if the dead ever walk again, will they still be human, or will they be us?